Welcome to the last video of our drywall series, video 10 of 10. I'm Kody with Up to Code. Today we're missing Camille, but we're just going to jump into this anyway. This last video, we're going to shoot everything second coat. Second coat, butt joints, flats, beads, angles, let all that dry. Then I'll actually have Camille come back, show her how to sand, how to finish it, and then it'll be ready for primer and paint. Now, the reason I don't have Camille on this last second coat stuff, mostly, like I like having her around. She's learning really well, picks it up really fast, but I don't want to bore the audience and you guys at home either. And that's one of my biggest things, is just part of my channel is get the information to you quickly, and I don't want to bore you and waste your guys' time. Now, I don't know if it's a mistake not having her or not, and only time will tell, but I'm just going to finish this all myself. And like I said, I'll have Camille in at the end and she can help me sand it out, and we'll do our official sign off for the video. But for now, what I'm going to do is everything is ready for second coat. I'm going to go around. Now my pole sander, somebody jacked it on me and decided they needed it more than I did. But I'm going to just go around with my little hand sponge. And that's what's nice, is I don't need a pole sander unless I have a giant job. I'm going to literally hit everything on the site here. What I'm trying to do is just get rid of any ridges. Let's see. I'll give you a few examples. We already sanded these butt joints once. We hit all the ridges there just to flatten it out a little bit. I want to get rid of any cliffhangers, any potential edging where I won't be able to blend it into nothing. So here, I want to just make sure I'm blended in. That way when I coat my second time, I don't have a ridge built up here. And that's all you're trying to avoid, is translating through some ridging and not having any cliffhangers, anything that's going to catch and cause hitchhikers in your mud. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put down my good camera gear. I don't want to get it full of drywall dust. I'm just going to hook up my iPhone 6, show you how I'm sanding everything. There won't be many explanations. But like I said, it's all about just getting it smooth, no cliffhangers, no edging. That way there's no translations. Then we'll get into coating all this on the second coat, and we'll jump into butt joints right after that. So we finished sanding. I gave it a quick vacuum. If you have a really just a nice fluffy broom, you can brush your walls. But if it's too coarse, don't do it because you might just end up scratching the heck out of all your work. So you can just give it a light breeze, vacuum it up, then you can keep going. One thing I want to iterate, and it was in video 9, but I didn't really spell it out for you, is that this is the time you want to be thinking ahead. For example, if we pre-filled these gouge marks from before in my bead, but here you got basically you want to look for any blemishes, anything's basically gouges, hitchhikers, anything that you need to fill up and catch up. You want everything at the relatively same level. Then when you go to second coat, it's just one coat, everything's done. So just if you have gouging or anything, take care of it before this step, let it dry, and that way when you do your second, you coat it and you're done. So first step, we're going to do the same order of coating, butt joints first, then flats, beads, angles last. One thing I want to note, I did thin my mud out because now it's second and final coat. It's more like a skim coat. I'm not building the shape. I'm just skimming over what I've already done. So I want just a little bit thinner, easier to work with. The dust that's on the wall, if you do give it a light brush, that's better because now that there's drywall dust everywhere, it's going to dry your mud out quite a bit too. So if it's thinner, gives you a little more working time. What I'm going to do on this wall is typically on a big job, do all your butt joints. Do everything all at once, but because it's second coat, it'll dry quick enough, and if you want to hit your flats at the same time, you can. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to actually do this butt joint and tie this flat out over to here, show you guys how to do it on small scale jobs so it speeds you up and you're not constantly waiting for dry times. I'll do the same over here, and then I'll just tie the flats together, and that way it's easy to tie into a quick little small transition right there. Well, let's just do it. Now remember, we're going to see how this turns out because this was the one spot that Camille just didn't cut it well enough, and it might end up being too thick and it might give us a little wonkiness. That would be something that if you were worried about it, I could have done a pre-fill, let that dry, and then do the second coat like we are right now. So second coat is pretty much the exact same as your first coat. You want to just apply your mud on. It's just going to be thinner, but other than that, it's the same. Everything's the same. Get it on, get it applied, get your consistency right, and then give it the last final wipe or two. And you can tell when I'm applying it, I apply it to the wall fairly square, and I just keep laying my trowel flatter, 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 till I run out of mud. I'm going to take a little bit that's thick down here, now note that I am going about an inch and a half wider than my original work, just to flare it out. Go a little bit wider. Okay, I'm just going to get a little more consistent, still heavy enough. Now I'm going to load up this flat. You can see my mud, I don't have any down here, very little up top. I'm just going to work into the corner, come across all of that. Now because of gravity, it's squished out the bottom. So I'm just going to pick up some of that material, transfer some more to the top of my trowel. I want to get my application a bit nicer. I'm going to put more weight on the top of my trowel. Okay, we're close. We've got to get a little more consistent. Now we're going to get it down a little bit closer. Try to get rid of the excess. Here you can see that little pocket where I'm empty. I either too thick and that's too thin. I can just go over it and try to fill that up. Same, then I'll just go, basically floating my trowel nice and flat to the wall. I'll cut this left edge off. Oop. Try that again. Cut that left. Notice how I didn't come through my flat. I'm just going to cut the bottom of this flat real quick. Then I'll go here, right of center, and just really lightly. I'll cut the right side. I'll cut this bottom. I'm just going to go super light across here, make sure I don't have too much mud. I'm going to get the butt joint done first. This is where my pants start getting dirty because I want to keep my trowel clean so I don't have hitchhikers. Up the middle, I'm going to carry it right up to the top. That way I can cut the top one more time and then just finish my flat. So I want to get the butt joint perfect. Now I'm just going to float across here all the way to the left, more weight on the left side. Here, just straight up, fairly flat to the wall where I'm kind of floating it. Here, more weight on the right side, just a bit, I'm not cutting it. I gotta finish getting this butt joint a little flatter. So when I mean floating it, my trowel is almost flat to the wall. So here I have a ridge and I want to flatten that out. I'm going to go once over there. Same thing here, once over top of this ridge to flatten it out. And that was a little too thick. The left side's really nice. More weight to the right. That's a little heavy. I'm going to go once up the middle. And this part you got to just play with. You kind of got to gauge how thick the mud is. Pretty good ridge there. One up the middle because I always want the middle flat. The finishing work isn't going to look as pretty unless I did the flats separately. It's tricky. I'm a little bit heavy here. You can see I could have those two ridges. This ridge over here is a little lighter. I think there's more mud on the right than the left. I'm going to leave it and see if I can sand it out and get it flat. Let's cut the top of this flat. See what I'm... Now that my mud's a little more fluid, it's also falling off my hawk a lot easier. This is what I mean. Now I got to wipe this off because when I drag it this way, I started to get a million tiny little hitchhikers there. I'm going to little more weight on the top, float the bottom so I don't cut into the butt joint. And I'm just going to float across this. I see a hollow spot in my flat. You can see why it's harder to do this all at once. So if you want to err on the side of caution, do your butts, do your flats after they dry. Nope, it's fine. If I carry this up through, right through that flat, it's actually working pretty good. Just had too much mud. That just goes to show that my first coat was so good. I don't need much for the second. And a little bit of bragging. Once up the middle to finish this bad boy off. Once through the flat, and I'm just going to float across it all. And that's just to make sure that I didn't create a ridge going up this way. I'm going to leave it like that. We'll see how that sands out. And we'll do one more test over here and see if I can tie it all in decent. I'm going to adapt my processes as I go. I'm going to do this butt joint all by itself. I don't want to overcomplicate it for you guys. I want to show you how to do a second coat on a butt all by itself. And the only butt joint I have left is that super one that ties into the bead. Now I can describe it a bit better. Okay, load up mud on the top side. And I'm going to work it into this angle. These angles are actually, if you look really closely, we did them a couple hours ago for video 9. But they're done in a way that I don't have to overlap them with the work that I'm doing right now. So I'm just going to end, I don't want to go much further than that. Tuck it up into that corner, jiggle it so that it's into that angle. And that's why it's important to always do your angles last, because then you can overlap any weird ridging and cancel it out. Just need a little more mud, not much. But hopefully that first example shows you the difference between having too much mud and not enough. Basically what too much mud looks like. Again, into here. See how flat I was to the wall? Because I didn't have much mud, so I had to get it nice and flat to get it applied. Picked it up, not going to wipe it off. Now this is where you got to be careful not to have too much mud on the back side of your trowel, because then you can get it up into your work on the other side of that angle. Okay, I'm going to wipe that again. I'm going to pick up the mud so that I can overlap my first coat just enough so it's feathered into nothing. Little bit of mud on the right hand side. Coat this so I'm wider than my first coat. I'm just going to pick up some mud because I need a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit more on this right side just because I want my lines nice and straight. Okay, I'm going to just not officially cut this left side, but just take a little bit off. Way too much here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to give this a little wipe. Sometimes at this stage, it's like, okay, now what do I do? I'm going to wipe this left side, not cutting it. I'm just going to put lots of weight on the left. Same on the right. Little more weight on the right hand side. I'm going to go down the middle, nice and flat, because that's what I want. Okay, you can see these ridges. Those need to be flattened out, but before that, I'm gonna cut this left-hand side. So I'm gonna cut that. You can see how much mud I took off. Just like 6 inches worth, and you can tell by the ripples that I didn't cut too much into my work. Same here. Cut that left. You can see I barely took any, but I blended it to nothing. I'm actually gonna do that a little bit more, but less weight. And I cut a little bit more off. It's getting close, but we don't know officially yet. I'm gonna do one across the bottom. I'm gonna cut this bottom off, because I don't need a big old lump there across my flat. I'm gonna go one more down the middle. Then I'm gonna go on the left, most of my weight, or just a decent amount on the left, as to not dig any workout on the right. Same here, little more weight on the right, float across down here. I have a ridge here and here. I'm gonna go straight down the center of my trowel over those ridges, nice and flat across my work. Same here, nice and flat down that ridge. Now I have created a ridge down the middle, and that's my last step. One down the middle to flatten that out. And that looks good to me. I'm not going to try to wipe this flat across. I can tell it's blending down. I've cut my edge off, so I didn't create a ripple. That'll be flat. We're going to leave this the way it is. Then we'll treat this officially. We'll let this dry enough, and we'll pull the rest of our flats. And I got a little hangy there, but I'm not going to touch it. I'll just sand that out when I do my final sand. This flat, and all the rest on the job site, I'm going to leave now till all this dries and I can run across it. Then after flats, we'll hit our beads and we'll keep going. All right, thanks for tuning in. We did that super butt joint that tied into a corner bead video, and we did the first coat. This actually ended up really flat. I can tell by feeling it, and you can also tell by running your trowel across it. But now is time to do the second and final coat. So I'll show you how to do that. And because this first one I got really good shape and minimal shrinkage, I'm literally just going to skim over top of it. So I have to be careful not to load it on too thick. Then as I work my way down, I'll have to just tie this bottom into here like I did on the first time. If you guys want, like, I'm not going to describe much about coating beads, because that will be in my drywall course on the bead section of that video. So if you want to know more techniques in that on the bead portion, it's separated in our drywall video. Half hour later, just want to show you guys what the mud looks like as it's starting to dry. You can tell right here, it's almost dry through the bottom of that flat, which is exactly, there's no heavy ridge. Everywhere else is actually drying very consistently, which tells me that this super butt joint is all flat, and then it's drying up nicely along the edge, which we want. This butt joint, you can see down the middle, it's starting to go white, starting to dry. The edges are white, they're dry, they're starting to feather out. And same here. It's nice and flat. You can see where the tapes are in the angle. It's starting to dry down the middle, dry on the edges, and dry along the bottom. So I think it just shows that it's done really well. It's flat, and you can see where it's filled and where it hasn't filled. My butt joints are drying really well, especially across where the flats are. In order for me to just speed up my time, I'm just going to coat these right now. So about that much on the trowel. I'll just tie into that a little bit. I'll load up a little less. I just need to get a little on my trowel and then just fill up this inside angle. Man, I keep dripping because I'm not paying attention. I'm gonna give it one more wipe and then maybe cut these edges down. There's a good old hitchhiker. Okay, I cut the top. Then I'm gonna just stand this up, wipe it once, done. This one I'm not gonna do any sanding on because everything's really flush and there's no cliffhangers gonna happen. Load up some mud there. Get it really close to the inside corner. I'm gonna come across this butt joint. Now because the butt joint isn't fully cured, I'm just gonna be a little more careful. Make sure I have a decent amount of mud as I come across it so I don't gouge it out. Gonna load up a little bit, get it into this angle. Come across this lightly. I'm going to do a little bit more down at the bottom here. Just going to go a little wider. I can always cut it off. So I'm going to gently cut the top. You can see I didn't gouge that butt joint. Cut the bottom. One swipe to finish it. And because there's a little too much mud, I'll have to cut this bottom again. One more time. Load up some mud in the middle. Get it on a little bit heavy. Wipe it down so it's close. See here I'm thin and I'm thicker as I go along, so when I start I'll just go really light and then I'll press a little heavier. I'll cut my edges. Cut this bottom edge. One down the middle. The flat is all full. Good? Yep. This one I'm going to stay away from the angle just because the angle's already coated and I don't want to wreck the work on the other side there. Get it really close. Cut these edges. One wipe. And we can't forget about this last one here. Got to be careful not to pick up hitchhikers in this corner. If I want my mud wider, I just apply it a little wider on the trowel. Cut these edges. Down the middle. That all took place really quickly. Didn't take much time because everything's drying really quickly. These flats are going to dry really quick, but we'll just leave those overnight because now when we pull our beads, especially like over here for example, when we pull through, we don't want to gouge any of that and we're going to have to cut past. We're going to have to cut our edge off. So we'll let it sit up really well now and we'll just keep going. But you can see how as you're getting close to the final coat, how quick it dries and how quick you can start really getting the job done. It's the next day, our flats are dry. We're gonna get on the second coat of beads. I do want to explain things a little bit more clearly than I did when we did the first coat with Camille. I feel like I maybe didn't clarify well enough. So for today, on this bead, you can see that my first coat filled it up really nicely because I held my trowel more square and I didn't lay it flat. And with being it square, it keeps it straighter and there's less of a dip in the mud. So that way my second coat will be less of a fill and more of a skim. Now today, I'm gonna go overlap this mud 3/4 of an inch, but I still have 3/4 of an inch of my trowel overhanging the bead. And that way I can follow this with my eye, and that way my trowel isn't going back and forth and my lines are nice and straight. And I think for now, yeah, I'll show you a few different ways to apply the mud, and that way you can try a few different methods on your own. Now obviously mudding and applying it the way that I do is the easiest, but it takes some expertise to get there. So for now, I'll just go this way. The way that I was trying to show Camille is just get the mud applied. Now here, when I'm getting close to the corner, I'm gonna have discrepancy there. So I'm gonna get the mud close. I'll try to iterate this clearly. I know my gauge. I've set where I want my mud to start. I want my lines nice and straight. It's easy to do after the first coat because I already have that first line, but when you're doing it originally, and what I showed Camille is just gauge where do you want that to go, put a few daubs of mud where you want your line, and that way you can just apply sideways, just get the mud on there. If you want a nice straight line, just apply like that. And the other thing I tried to describe and I wasn't very clear on is you can wipe it fairly tight here because it's going to blend to nothing. And then you want to let the mud get thicker and thicker at the corner because it'll be thicker here than it is over here. So when you're doing your rough application, don't have it super thick anywhere. Just try to taper it manually on your own. Now I got loads on there. I'm going to give it just a light wipe. Now I loaded some up on the trowel. Now it's perfect. I can just push it into this edge, wiggle it back and forth, work it into the corner, and then just do my application. Again, sometimes once you get some experience, always leave a little bit of mud on the trowel and just get it in there. Make sure it's not spilling over on this side of the trowel because that'll collect on the other side of your angle. Okay, I might go a little bit further. And you can see when I'm loading it, it's kind of got a half moon shape. And that works well for me when I'm applying it like this. That's pretty good. Sorry, I'm just gonna give that a light wipe. It's fairly consistent, but it's still too thick. But I want to do the same application on the other side of this angle. So I don't need it as wide because I'm not going the full 12 inches. And sometimes, I'll give you a good example here. If I apply the mud like that, and you can see I have a void there and a void over here, you can, if your mud's too thick, you can just work it lightly, work it down. Just get it filled. Load a little bit up. Doesn't really matter what it looks like when you're getting it on. Okay. Oh darn. That is going to happen lots when you're doing it for the first time. Okay. I'm just going to load. I want to end them at roughly the same length. So now I'm just getting it more consistent and thinning it out a little bit. Got some spillage on the corner that I want to get rid of. Okay. I am going to cut this top edge. I'm going to cut this edge. Maybe what I'll do, I'm just going to do a nice light wipe here. Basically just want to get rid of these hangies off of this corner. So this one, I'll just do even pressure the whole way. I'm going to do it one more time. Because right here, I feel it's a bit thicker and it's actually coming off of the actual metal part of the bead. Just give it one more nice light wipe. And one more on the bottom. I don't know, I'm thick here for some reason. I don't know why. I can tell I'm thick because now I can see the green part of the bead, whereas before I could tell I had a little lump there. Now this is the point where, do you mess with that little chunky that's there, or do you not? Because if you wipe out too much of your work, then you either have to reapply or you basically just barely put anything on. So let's try something. Pull up. Sorry. Yep. See, it's getting a little dangerous. I'm just gonna leave that. It'll sand off. Yep, you gotta know when to stop. Here, I wanna point out, I don't know if you guys can tell, but you can see where it's filling. You can kind of see by that contour where it's filled up kind of in the middle there. So it might be hard for you guys to see at home. Let's keep building. Couple different techniques for you. And if you're really paying attention in the course, remember there's a butt joint here. And I remember running my hand across it and feeling it, and it felt really flat. So we actually never did a second coat on that butt joint. And we didn't really need to because it is so short and it did feel nice and flat. But those are things you got to be mindful of when you're mudding at home. You can tell that my mud isn't the full width of the trowel, and that's how I can avoid it spilling over and onto the floor. And I think that just comes from experience. I don't really know how else to describe it, is loading it up in that moon shape, squishing it around, making sure it's still not right to the very edges, and that'll avoid some overspill. All right, application's on, still way too thick. Just gonna give it a light one here. I'm gonna try to get rid of some of this mud in advance. That didn't work. All right. I'm gonna go one more time around here. Now time to cut some edges. We'll cut this one. Shaky McGee here. Should have about 10 more coffees. That'll solve that. Okay, application. Final wipe. Perfect. No major hitchhikers. Seems pretty smooth. Cut edge nice. One thing you could do at home is I could have preloaded this side and had this pretty close so that when I wipe that clean, this was already applied and pretty consistent. And then there's less of a chance of me spilling mud over to that other side and wrecking my work. Let's see if I got any scales left. Okay, so again, if you need to, just figure out where you want your line to be. Apply it sideways, get it on there, and then just try to give it that taper. I'm gonna I'm running low on crud. If I could use the mud off my shoe, I would have lots. Ready, folks? Notice how I start square to the wall, and then as I apply, I just keep getting flatter, 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 flatter. I can pretty much get all the mud off the old trowel. The only reason I cut that just then, just because I need to get all the possible mud I can. Sorry, I'm all over the mat. Okay. Just gonna do one light one here, folks. Get my consistency a bit better. Okay, now I'm going to cut some edges. Pretty thick still. So that's how I avoid hitchhikers. Okay. Yeah, it's one of those technique things. If it's too much mud, you can see how it causes you issues on this outside corner. All right, let's try. Yeah, corners, man, they're tough. Gotta be safe. This is my last wipe. Okay, we finally got it. That's kind of what to expect when you're doing it at home for the first time. Is I was a little too thick, so I just had to work it back and forth, back and forth. And as long as you know your trowel's riding on the corner bead, that's going to be pretty important, because otherwise it could get pretty away on you. Be aware of that, and just a couple offsets and that tearaway. We'll do this tearaway first. This is the last of my muds. We've literally used 1 pail of Kody mud for this whole set and this whole project. So remember, I coated this with a 4-inch, and now I'll coat it with the 6. It actually needs a fair bit of fill, so we'll see how this one turns out. How to apply. Very carefully. Remember, this is our wood wall we got to protect. And I'm just taking little bits at a time, thicker where I need it to be thick, thinner where it blends into the drywall. Can't forget to coat my screws again today. Couple of thick zones there. I'll just run over it one more time. I just got to even it, get the consistency down. I'm going to cut this edge. Actually, let's try not cutting this edge. Let's try it. I'm going to try to wipe it more angular, more 90 degrees to the wall. You can see I just about spilled over onto my wood wall, but I was able to stop myself. You can see there I didn't need to actually cut it. And that might be really important for you at home, is sometimes if you can avoid cutting that edge, it might save you a whole lot of hassle just learning that technique. don't do that. It's better to pull than to push. Let's try to do both sides at once and we'll see how that fares. This is the last of my mud. This we did with 4-inch and then we'll do a 6. This was 6 off the bat, but it needs another coat. Let's give it a shot. This one you got to be careful not to build it up too thick, because then you lose that inside corner like was happening to me last time and it gets wavy on you. That's not what we need. Okay, pretty good application there. Let's see what happens this time. And I'm trying to keep my big old head out of the camera view here. So I think the trick here, get it real consistent. And then we'll just work one side, one side, one side, one side, so that they remain the same thickness relatively, limit that spillage. Let's give it a shot. So I'm just gonna go really light on this one. My focus is just to maintain that angle. This side's always giving me grief. And it's probably why it's so important to pre-fill properly. Because if I didn't pre-fill and it might actually make this even worse. I'll just clean up this edge. I'm going to finish with this side because I feel like this side is more true and easier to maintain that straight line down the inside corner. Man, what is going on with that thing? It is a better line. Doing both sides at once is always way harder. Just takes a little more finesse, but it'll save you a step too.
So you don't have to dry it?
You don't have to wait for 2 drying times. Trying to save myself an extra step. What do I do? She's getting left, my friends. It's getting left. Now what I should have done is come down a bit more, so when I came upward it was easier to tie into. Now it's at an awkward height for me, so that's going to be fun. And maybe you guys have a better way of doing this at home, or different experience, or a different bead. And that's great. Because there might be a better way. And I'm just trying to teach more of the techniques and the... Yeah, fuck, I should have finished my sentence. Okay, I'm just trying to teach more of the techniques. Yeah, as for what beads to use, you know, obviously there's going to be different ways. Just going light. I'm going to just try to go with the downward motion and blend into this nice. Because I finished on the left last time, I have to maintain that same, I don't even know what you call it. Same technique. This one I'm going to cut. I don't want to be sanding more than I need to. Hopefully I don't mess up my work. Finish on this side. All right, check that out, you guys. Take a good look. I think it's going to be good. There might be a little more sanding to do, and let's just try that. I'm not going to do any more filling unless absolutely necessary, and we're going to sand that out and see how well it looks at the end. So I caught up my screws. We'll see if those shrunk back, and if they're nice and flush, then I can just sand those out at the final. If they're still divoted and concaved, I guess, I'll do one more quick little fill and sand those at the end. But you can tell that now the second coat goes so fast. It didn't take very long to coat out all the beads because we did a good job on the first coat and it was nice and full. And now it's only been like 10 or 15 minutes. You can tell that second coat up top here is almost dry. You can actually look, you can see the chatter marks from the first coat that I did, and it's filled all those and smoothed it right over. And you can just tell the dark spots are thicker and the thin spots are starting to dry out. I let the beads dry for a day, and now I can just finish these angles, and then we're all done mudding. One thing that I want to do, and this is probably important, I always mess up the order of the angles. If I left them more to the very last, I wouldn't have to do this step. But because I didn't cut this drywall right tight, I'm just going to give it a light sand. Blend that edge so it doesn't translate. And then when I coat over it, it'll be perfect. That's just for there. Now on this, because my flat was cut in tight, I don't have to do anything more on this one. I might just run my knife over it. There. Just clean off any chunkies. Now I can just finish these angles. Alrighty, so that side. Sometimes it's hard to get it into that corner. cut that off. Cut it again, just tricky, tricky. I'm going to leave that. I'll sand that out, and that should turn out pretty well. And I think for angles, it's just the same old thing. We don't really need to cover this a whole lot because we already have it in most of the video. We just need to never forget to finish it off. It's the last step. And if I would have thought about my order a bit more and been a little more patient, I could have done these angles very last and would have just saved a little bit of hassle. Man. So I'm a little bit thick here, and I'm just going to cut it into the drywall and see if that's good enough. Little spillage to the other side, but I'll just deal with that, sand it out. Might just square that up with my sponge. Sometimes you just have to sand a little bit. That's it for mudding. We're done. The whole entire set is fully mudded. Let's roll into the rest of the bit. We're on the home stretch. All the mudding is done. We have Camille back. I want to show her how to sand this and finish it all out. How's it look, Camille?
It looks good. I would honestly just paint over top of this, but you said that's a big no-go because
Right.
Everything will just show.
Right. And that's actually super important is, yes, it might be super flat, but sanding is so critical because painting, you got to keep in mind, hides nothing. Literally hides zero. So having a nice flat surface, and we'll show you, we might as well just jump into sanding right now. I'll show you just the few high points, what to keep in mind. And then once everyone at home knows what we're doing, we'll mask up and then we'll just go to town and finish it off.
Perfect.
Okay, I'll just put this down for, actually, you know what, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this sanding pole. I typically just use the sponge. On small jobs like this, you can get away with just a sponge by itself. And on a big job, these poles are super handy. A couple things to keep in mind. I've kept, this is a foam backed paper, sandpaper. It's 220 grit. I know I have a friend of mine, he always keeps the one side flush to this edge or just proud just a hair. And that way when we sand up in the angles, you can sand with this side and it's nice and straight and solid. If you sand with this other side, it'll be all just flimsy and floppy. So we just went kind of flush to one edge. The other thing that I'm going to do, because this is brand new sandpaper, is I want to just grind it down, and I want to make sure that these edges are a little bit dull, because what I want to avoid and I have to be careful of is when I'm sanding is not to leave sanding scratches. And these edges, if they're flared out at all, they'll definitely just gouge the heck out of my work. So for now, I'm just going to take this. Try not to hit you with the old...
Yeah, pull in the face.
Pull in the face. I'm just sanding, trying to get these corners sanded right off.
Not a sturdy holder, I am.
Yeah, you're not a tabletop. But that's okay. What I'll do is before I start using this, I'll do all my screws with this, help dull it down a bit, and then I'll do all my big pieces of work with this. And hopefully then I'll just be really careful, make sure I'm not gouging anything. But let's get into how and what to be aware of. So Camille, the biggest thing, obviously when we're going heavy, we got to wear a mask up. Basically the fundamentals are this. You don't want any lines at all. Even this little edge where our flat is, you want to blend that. You want that blended into nothing. And that's why when we're cutting our edges, that's why that's so important. If you have this edge that's a little thicker, you still have to work. You just got to work a little harder to get that to blend into nothing. And even right here, you might think that's good. That'll show up in your paint.
Okay.
And just... So the circular motion works really well. This inside angle, because remember we went a little heavy with this, and it's not a perfect inside. It doesn't look perfect. So what I'll do is I'm basically just going to work at it from both sides and be very mindful of keeping that line nice and straight. Sometimes I just have to stay out of the inside angle a millimeter. Because if I go at it and I push too hard, I'll just end up making that groove deeper, deeper, deeper. So if I go up the angle, and then you just really have to massage it and make sure you're not damaging it. These are super tricky. One thing I want to mention right now, once you have it fully sanded, if there's any blemishes, gouges, scratches, ignore them. Do not go and put more mud on and try to sand that again and blend it. For some reason, it never blends. If you have it fully sanded and you have a little patch here and there, when you go to sand that patch, this surface is harder than the new mud and it just creates a ridge. Don't do it. If you have blemishes, prime it all out. Be mindful of when you're priming, and then do your mud after the fact. Do your touch-ups, and then you'll have to sand those and then basically touch primer those up again later too. So this inside corner, if I'm not happy with it, I'll just leave it. I'll prime it all. And I'll touch it up later, sand it, and re-prime up whatever spots I have to do. Even things like this, you see, once we get into the heavy sanding, all that has to be gone, and the surface is super smooth. Now, actually you want to hold that. For our screws, sometimes what I'll do is I want the outside to blend first. So sometimes I'll work the perimeter And then I'll go over it and blend into nothing. If I hit it too hard and sand it way too much, it's just going to sand that divot right out, and then it's hollow again. I have to go and fill it later. So here, and it works better with the sanding sponge, just go around the perimeters, around the outside. Then go over top, the middle, and then you're not over sanding your work. So like I said, basically blend all your edges and then just go over all your work. And as long as you're not making sanding scratches, it's perfect. Then these angles, remember how I mentioned that the angles, they're not perfect, but we have enough room to sand it and make them perfect. So if you look here, we have some blemishes, some spillover from the other side. Now remember, my block here has a coarse and a smooth, so I always just feel with my fingers, make sure I'm using the smooth side. And here, I'm just going to go into the corner once on each side, and that's it. Feather my edge, and then after that, I just kind of sand out the rest of it. So once on that side, once on the other. I don't want to dig into that corner. I'll cut that edge. And then, even sometimes I'll turn it so that I'm not digging out the other side. I'll just go like this. Feather that edge. And sometimes, in order to clean up the inside corner but not dig out the other side, is I'll just put my fingers against the block so I know I'm not creating pressure, but I'm really close to that edge. Something like that. I think that runs over everything. Blend all your edges, no sanding scratches. Be mindful not to dig out your work on the inside angles, and that's pretty much it. So with that, let's mask up. We're going to change camera gear so we don't wreck all our good equipment, and then at the end we'll show you what the product looks like. Why don't we make sure this isn't gouging, and then you can go to town, and I'll mask up, and I can just do all the finicky inside corners and that. So if you do in circles, and you notice how all that texture's gone, like sand it till that texture's all gone, it's super smooth. Also when you're sanding, you have to be careful not to flip this. If you're sanding sideways like this, it's gonna flip and it's gonna dent all your work. So either go in a circle or go on like an angle like this, so it's on a 45. You know what I mean? But if you're going straight, sometimes it'll catch and it'll flip over and knock your work.
Yeah, I did that earlier.
Yeah, you just got to be careful. So just do your edges. Like if you're going up and down, if you're on a 45, blend that edge. Blend this edge. Blend this edge. And then just go over it till that texture's gone, and you're good to go. So give that a little test run. I'll mask up and I'll do all the little finickies.
Do I need to?
Why don't you try with this bottom edge? Try to.
Oh my God. Try and do that?
Yeah. Yeah, make sure this is on a 45. Do a little bit more. You can even just go right along this edge. Now you can go over
The whole surface?
Yeah, just do it lightly. Do a little bit of sand and scratches. Actually, why don't we do all our screw heads first.
Okay.
Let's do that because that'll wear it down a bit. Yeah, and then just go dead over the center. A little more, just a little more. A little more, I can see a little bit of that edge.
Oh, right there.
That's good, perfect.
I gotta flip my whole thing around.
Pretty grippy on the drywall. A
Yeah.
little bit more, you can see this edge there, it needs. And don't forget when you're going, just hit all these little spots where our mud dropped on the wall. Yep, perfect. As you can see, sanding is a joyous occasion, but if you follow the course, limit the amount of sanding, do the steps. If you can't do your full course in 2 coats, it's better to do 3 thin coats than 2 heavy coats and sand your life away. We can do a light check as well. So here, I can do a light check kind of off to the side and just make sure I don't have any sanding scratches or gouges. See right there, I have a little gouge.
I'm not gonna be able to see that, I don't think.
But what
Keep it there.
I have a little gouge there.
Oh yeah, now I got it.
Now with something like that, I can actually just sand that out. So I could just, I'll do a little circle and then I'll go bigger, bigger, bigger till it's gone. Then I'm not touching that up later. Same with sanding scratches. Once you start looking around, any major blemishes, just do all your touch-ups with your sponge. What else? Right. So this, I don't want to bugger up the light on the set here, but you can light check, touch up any blemishes. You also saw me when we were sanding out, is just to feel your work. So here, I don't feel anything. If you use the whole palm of your hand and just go quickly, you should feel any lumps or bumps. Everything feels flat. Any intersections, I don't feel any blemishes. Like if you had a little hump there, you'd feel it. And then you could just work it and just blend it out. My inside corners, all my angles, you could tell when I had mud on there. It was, what didn't look perfect, but it sanded out just fine. And yeah, just check everything with the light. Check your butt joints. Check your intersections. Make sure nothing feels out of whack. Feel your angles. And usually you do that as you go along. And yeah, that's how you do it. Now we're ready for primer. Just about ready to sign off. Now, Camille, when we were sanding, we just hit this just once real lightly, and you can tell the difference, hey?
Yeah.
Where the edges aren't blended out.
Yeah, and it's a little like high and low when you rub it out a little.
Yeah, you can feel the highs and lows, and those edges will show up bright as day.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you got to blend all that. But anyway, that's the course. What did you think? Did you learn?
I did, yeah. I learned a lot, and lots of stuff I didn't even think would be necessary.
Right.
In drywall and mudding,
Right.
but
Do you feel if you had like a bathroom or something, you feel comfortable if you could do it by yourself now?
yeah, if I called you a couple times just to make sure, I'm pretty sure I could
Yeah.
do it.
Or she could watch the course.
Or I could watch the course online.
But it is weird because once you see yourself online, I'm so used to it. But for you, if you watched it, you're gonna be like, oh, my voice sounds weird, or
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Probably pick everything apart.
Yeah. But for me, I'm just like, I'm so used to it, I don't even care anymore. Actually getting sick of watching myself, so that's why we brought Camille on. And yeah, hopefully that helps you guys learn the concepts and basically learn from scratch. This is what the end product will look like. And I hope your project turns out really well. So thanks for tuning in.
See you guys.